Legitimization Part 3. The Oghuz genealogy arose at a time when the Islamic monarchs of Anatolia and Azerbaijan, who were the immediate rivals of the Ottomans, were all Turkish, and compiled their genealogies from similar Turkish materials. The Ottoman genealogy served to show that the Ottoman sultans were superior by descent to these neighboring dynasts. By the mid-16th century, when the political situation of the empire was quite different, and the culture of the elite was cosmopolitan and Islamic rather than Turkish, the genealogy lost some of its legitimizing force. Nonetheless, it remained fossilized within the historiographical tradition until the 20th century. There was, however, one change. From the early 16th century, under the influence of a prophetic tradition which foretold the conquest of Constantinople by the sons of Isaac, historians began to trace the early genealogy through Shem and Esau rather than through Japheth. 41 This genealogy is at odds with the original version of the dynastic descent, since it disassociates the sultans from the Turks, whom tradition depicts as descendants of Japheth, and links them through Shem to the Arabs, Semites and Apos. This, however, is in keeping with the increasingly cosmopolitan character of the Ottoman elite in the 16th and 17th centuries, who would no longer comprehend the significance of the Turkish descent from Oghuz Khan, but for whom a link with the Arabs might indicate a connection with the Prophet. The Oghuz genealogy, in its various versions, provided the sultans with a physical descent which vindicated their claims to rulership. To claim a religious legitimacy, they also required a spiritual genealogy and evidence of divine approval. They acquired this through a series of popular tales which appeared first in late 15th century chronicles, and later became embedded in the historiographical tradition. In Islamic belief, God speaks to man in dreams, and a number of stories in the early chronicles tell how God promised Osman and his father in dreams that he would exalt their descendants. The most famous of these episodes, which became canonical in later tradition, occurs in the Chronicle of Ashik-Pashazade of about 1484, and describes Osman's dream when he was a guest of the dervish, Edebali. In it, Osman sees a moon rising from Edebali's breast and entering his own. Then a tree grows from his navel and covers the world. In the shadow of the tree were mountains, with water flowing from their feet, and people drinking the water, cultivating their gardens and making fountains. In the morning, Edebali interpreted the dream as meaning that God had granted rulership to Osman and his descendants. At the same time, he betrothed his daughter to Osman. She became the mother of Orhan, and so the female ancestor of the dynasty. The function of the story is to show, firstly, that God had intended the Ottoman dynasty to be rulers, and secondly to provide it with a spiritual genealogy through Edebali. Edebali, whether he was real or legendary, was a figure who occupied an important position in the spiritual lineage of the Feyye order of dervishes, to which Ashik-Pashazade also belonged. In the Feyye, as in all dervish orders, each master has his own spiritual master, leading back in an unbroken chain to the founder of the order. In the case of the Feyye, this was to Abul Wafa of Baghdad, d. 1107. From this point, the order traces its spiritual lineage back to the Prophet Muhammad and, through the angel Gabriel, to God. Ashik-Pashazade's story of Osman's marriage to Edebali's daughter, therefore, links the Ottoman sultans to his own order, the Feyye, and provides them with a spiritual descent, going back through Abul Wafa to the Prophet. This religious lineage complements the political genealogy going back through Oghuz Khan to Noah. The genealogies of the dynasty and the dream stories derive their material from popular belief, and in this reflect the relatively modest pretensions of the sultans in the 15th century, when the stories emerged. In the 16th and 17th centuries the claims of the sultans became more grandiose and, at the same time, more dependent on learned tradition. In 1453, Mehmed II captured Constantinople and, through its possession, acquired from the defeated Byzantine emperor claim to the Roman imperial title. This did not, however, feature prominently in Ottoman titulature until a century later. From 1526 onwards, the Sultan's greatest opponents in the West were the Habsburg emperors, of whom the greatest was Charles V, King of Spain and Holy Roman Emperor. Rivalry between Suleiman I and Charles V was a dominant theme of the mid-16th century. 42 and 1547, Suleiman concluded a treaty with Charles and his brother, Ferdinand of Austria, in which he granted peace in exchange for tribute for the lands which the Habsburgs held in Hungary. In the text of the treaty, Charles no longer refers to himself as Holy Roman Emperor but simply as King of Spain. 43 And it was from this moment that Suleiman regarded himself as having wrested the title of Roman Emperor from his rival. Henceforth, epithets such as Caesar of Caesars begin to appear in Ottoman titulature. 44 The importance to the sultans of the Roman title became apparent at the time of the negotiation of the Treaty of Jiva-Turuk in 1606. The Habsburg emperor would not accept the title king, but neither would Ahmed I concede the title Caesar and Abbas. The compromise which the Ottomans found was, in the 17th and 18th centuries, to keep the title Caesar and to address the Habsburg rulers as emperor. 45 The Ottoman claim to the title of Roman emperor was not the end of the Sultan's imperial pretensions. In the mid-16th century, Suleiman added Khosrows of Chosroes to his sultanic titles, presumably, since Khosrows is a generic name for the ancient rulers of Iran, in celebration of his victories over the Safavid Shahs. By the midpoint of his reign Suleiman styled himself Sultan of the Arabs, Persians and Romans and Abbas. However, the most important title that he bequeathed to his successor was Caliph or Imam, words which, in a political context, imply supreme headship of the Islamic world. The concept of the caliphate is one that derives from Islamic theology and historiography. The Sunni Muslim historians give the title to the four successors of the Prophet, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali, whom they revere as the rightly guided caliphs. Thereafter, the title became attached in particular to the Abbasid rulers between 750 and 1258. These associations gave the term a historical dignity. From the 10th century onwards, the Sunni theologians began to develop a theory of the caliphate, although they prefer the terms imam and imamate to caliph and caliphate and Abbas. The imam, in their view, achieves office as the result of a contract which he makes with one or more men of loosing and binding, and, for the contract to be valid, the imam must fulfill a number of conditions. These vary from writer to writer, but one on which all agree is that the imam must belong to the Prophet's tribe, the Quraysh. In Sunni theory, therefore, the caliphate or imamate is contractual rather than hereditary. Caliph, as a title of the Ottoman sultans, appears for the first time in 1424, but its use at this time was rhetorical rather than specific. It was not until the reign of Suleiman I that the sultan began to claim the title ex officio. His chief propagandist in this was the chief mufti, Abu Su'o, who, realizing that the Ottoman sultans could not claim to be from the Quraysh, the genealogy was already fixed, ignored the classical theory of the caliphate, 46, and instead asserted that the Ottoman sultan occupied this position by divine right. He was the one upon whom God Most High has bestowed the caliphate of the earth and Abbas. He asserted, too, that the Ottoman sultans were the inheritors of the great caliphate, a reference to the rightly guided caliphs, and that they inherited the office from father to son and Abbas. This was a view which directly contradicted the classical theory, whose only influence on the Ottomans seems to have been the form of the oath of allegiance. These assertions effectively make the Ottoman sultans direct heirs to the rightly guided caliphs, who were the immediate successors to the Prophet. It was therefore a claim which implied rulership of the entire Islamic world. It was also one which was to last, with many vicissitudes until the end of the empire. 47 There were therefore many strands to Ottoman claims to legitimacy, each of which had emerged at a different time to meet different circumstances. The original justification of the Sultan's right to rule was as a leader in war. By 1400 at the latest this role had been sanctified, and he had become a leader of holy war. Warfare against Muslim dynasties was justified, because these distracted him from this sacred task. At the beginning of the 15th century, following defeat and civil war, the Sultan re-established his claim to rightful rulership by the creation of the Oghuz genealogy, the fabrication, later in the same century, of a spiritual genealogy and of tales which proved that Ottoman rule was divinely ordained, gave a religious sanction to the Sultanate, which paralleled its secular descent from Oghuz Khan. By 1500, the Sultan began to legitimize his rule in Anatolia on the foundation of a story that made the Ottomans legal heirs of the Seljuks. From 1453, but especially after 1547, he could claim to have inherited the title of Roman Emperor, while victories over the Mamluks and Safavids made him Khosrows and ruler of the Arabs and Persians and Abbas. In the 16th century, Suleiman laid claim to the title and office of caliph. Of these legitimizing devices, those of holy warrior, successor to the Seljuks, and caliph were to survive into the 20th century.